everyone. Today I have Gary Sosniecki, the author of The Potato Mash Murder, which actually takes place here in Elkhart County. We are super excited to hear about this book and talk with Gary. So thank you so much for being here. Why don't you talk a bit about your book and how it came into life?
Well, first, thank you for having me, Kristen. The book is the result of a lifelong curiosity about what happened to my great grandmother. I had heard growing up that there had been a murder, but the family didn't talk about it. There were very few details. Anything that might have been mentioned was very cryptic. So I'm a journalist by profession and worked full time for 43 years in the newspaper business or related to the newspaper business. And I started back in 1996 doing a little bit of research. You know, that was the birth of the internet era, and we all had AOL accounts and CompuServe accounts, and started exploring a little bit, and we were limited what we could do, but started researching it back then. But I really didn't get started on it full force until 2016 when I retired. And like an old man in retirement, I tripped and broke my ankle 5 or 6 months into retirement, and I had time to write. I couldn't do anything else for a few months. So that's when I really started researching, and that was now it's resulted all these years later in a book.
Tell us a bit about your research process. What resources did you use? How did that go for you?
Well, at the beginning, back in 1996, I discovered a state-appointed historian of LaPorte County. First thing I had to do was figure out where this murder happened. And I got my mom to talk a little bit about it. She was getting older, and she finally told me just a few details. And she was a little bit off on the details. She thought it happened in LaPorte County, where her grandfather was from. And actually, yes, that's where her grandparents, my great grandparents, were from. But there's 3 counties involved. You have 3 adjacent counties. There's LaPorte County, where they're from. There's Elkhart County, where the Ludwig family is from. The Henderson and Hornberg families in LaPorte County came from Germany. The Ludwig family in Elkhart County also came from Germany. I'm sorry, the Henderson family came from Scotland. The Ludwig family came from Germany. And then you've got St. Joseph County in the middle. And that's where the murder occurred. The murder occurred in Mishawaka. The trial was held in South Bend. So really there were newspapers in all 3 counties that were covering this, just like a dog with a bone.
While you were writing this book, what surprised you the most?
Several things surprised me. First, that the marriage, the killer, Alvin Ludwig, who was from Elkhart County, he and Cecilia both had ferocious tempers, and both knew how to use foul language, and I was surprised the marriage lasted as long as it did. This was her second marriage. It was Alvin's first, and it lasted just short of 5 years before it blew up with a murder. Both had talked about going to attorneys for a divorce. Cecilia had tried to move out before, so it was a really toxic situation. So that was the first surprise, that it lasted as long as it did without something like this happening. The second thing was discovering how common spousal abuse was in that era. Doing a little bit of research, I learned that, you know, it really wasn't until the 1870s that abusing your wife became illegal in some states. It was common that the society looked the other way if a man beat his wife, and that's not good. And then the third thing that surprised me, that killing a spouse was common enough that the term wife murder was used in the newspapers commonly. I did some research into other wife murders in Indiana during that first decade of the 20th century, and I was really surprised that was a term that newspapers used. Wife murder in Elkhart, wife murder in South Bend, wife murder in Fort Wayne, and that surprised me.
Do you have a favorite part of the book?
Well, I think the favorite part of the book for me was the first chapter. It sets the story of what happened the night before the murder, which is September 24th, 1906. That's the night before the murder. And the couple was living in Mishawaka. They were married in Elkhart. They had lived in Elkhart until they were living at Albin's widowed mother's house, and they were living there until Cecilia attacked the mother-in-law. Her mother-in-law one day, and like 10 days later attacked the sister-in-law, and the mother kicked them out. Then they lived someplace else in Elkhart until Albin could sell the saloon that he owned in downtown Elkhart. So the night before, September 24th, they're living in Mishawaka, and Cecilia's sister Jean had moved into the house about 2 or 3 months later, along with 2 of her young children. She had just left her husband. So Cecilia and Jean were gadding about town quite frequently, and they'd been out on that afternoon shopping for shoes. Well, after the evening meal, Cecilia and Jean headed to downtown Mishawaka. That isn't where they told Albin they were going. They told Albin that they were going to a drugstore to buy some iodine and glycerin that Cecilia used to treat her sore feet, which they did. But then they went beyond that to the south, to the Four Corners of Mishawaka, which today would be known as South Main Street and Lincoln Way. Back then, Lincoln Way was known as 2nd Street. And Albin followed them surreptitiously, but he followed them, and he saw them go there. That's about a 15-minute walk from their house. And he saw them meet with a man by the name of Ackerman. And that infuriated him so much to see that he spotted a policeman on the corner and had the policeman, a patrolman, James Anderson was his name, had him go and identify the women. And it was dusk, and Albin told him that it was important that he knew who they were in case something happened. So this whole chapter leads up to the murder. That the women and this man, they go to a boarding house. They find another man who Cecilia and Jean know. Albin suspects that Cecilia is having an affair with this man. Actually, he might be having an affair with Jean, the sister, but they all walk home, and there's quarreling all evening long, and the next day is the murder.
What was the most difficult scene to write?
Well, the most difficult scene was the murder, because there's 2 scenarios to the murder. The prosecution believes that at the dinner table, Albin and Cecilia had a quarrel, and dinner being the new meal back then, that they had a quarrel, and Albin grabbed the wooden potato masher, and this is a wooden potato masher from that era. They came in many different styles. Some of them were a little bigger than this one, but if swung like a mallet, this could be a deadly weapon. So the prosecution theory was that Albin grabbed the potato masher, chased Cecilia upstairs into the bedroom, knocked her unconscious with the potato masher, dragged her into a closet. Then Albin, thinking about, okay, how am I going to explain this? He he decided to attack himself with a razor. He cut himself on the throat and on the arms initially, and and started bleeding. And then he said, "Now, what am I going to do with this body? What am I going to do with this body in the closet?" So he grabs a tin can and he goes down and pours kerosene or gasoline into this tin can, not this one, but a similar tin can, and pours it on top of the body, sets it on fire, closes the closet door, puts a rocking chair in front of the closet door, and then he goes, lays down on the bed and stabs himself some more with this razor, including a pretty serious wound to his leg that almost killed him. All right, now Albin's side of the story is that he thought that Cecilia, who was getting ready to leave him and had been packing that morning, that Cecilia may have poisoned his coffee at lunch, because he got sick to his stomach soon after lunch. Now, it could have been stress, but he thought that he was sick to his stomach. So he went and sat on the porch for a little bit. He was still sick. He went into the backyard where and during the day they kept the slop jar. Slop jar, also a chamber pot, is what people used as a toilet if they didn't have plumbing in the house, or if they had plumbing downstairs but not upstairs. He grabbed the slop jar, he took it upstairs to the bedroom, he laid down on the bed. He's depressed, and Albin says, "Well, wait a minute, there's a life insurance policy. She's the beneficiary. I've got to find that life insurance policy." He looks in the dresser. Life insurance policy isn't there. Then he says, "Oh, did she put it in the trunk she's packing?" Well, the trunk is in the closet. He goes into this closet, and this walk-in closet, a pretty good size, it's 5 foot by 8 feet. So he goes into the closet. He starts looking through the trunk. Now, according to Albin's story, Cecilia comes running up the stairs. She's got the potato masher, and she says, "What are you doing?" "Well, I'm looking for the insurance policy." Well, she swears at him, and I won't use that on the video, but she swears at him. And she says, "Have you decided about the property?" And he says, "Well, we'll split it in half." He talked about the house and the furniture. We'll split it in half. And she swears at him again, and she says, "I want it all." And he says, "Well, only if a court says you can have it all." "Oh, you son of a gun!" And she takes a swing at Albin with the potato masher. He grabs it. It falls to the ground. And then he grabs her around the neck and pushes her back against the closet wall. Well, there's a wire hook, a whole row of wire hooks. And I don't know, some of your listeners probably remember having wire hooks in the closets at the grandma's house, because I remember my grandma had wire hooks. All right, so that's the defense explanation of how she's got this wound. The prosecution theory is that she was knocked on the head with the potato masher. That created this wound, which was big enough you could stick a finger into it. A coroner did that. And the defense theory is that she hit it on the wire hook. Well, Cecilia is being choked. She collapses. And then Albin's theory is that he had dropped the kerosene lantern, and that's what set her on fire. Now, where the accelerant came from for her to burn to death pretty severely in the closet, I don't know where that happened, but again, that's Albin's theory. So that was a hard chapter to write, because I needed to present both sides of the story, and really, Albin was the only one who was alive afterwards to tell the story.
Yeah. So you talked a bit about never knowing much about this murder growing up, and wanting to research it more. Where in the process did you then decide, I have a book and I should publish this for other people to read?
Yeah. At the beginning, I thought, well, this is just interesting family history. We've got the internet now. I'm searching my family tree. I discovered relatives in Denmark that I didn't know that I had. Sosniecki's not a common name. So got a family in Denmark. So I'm researching this. I want to know. My brother wants to know, and we made a research trip. My wife and I did uh, after after I recovered from breaking my ankle. We made a research trip to Indiana and spent time in Elkhart and in uh, um, Mishawaka and South Bend and Kingsbury, which was a little town by LaPorte where the Henderson family lived. And I wanted to find the trial transcript. And I couldn't find the trial transcript in South Bend because according to the South Bend St. Joseph County archives, they disposed of felony case material after 55 years. So I was really down, that, well, gosh, I got newspaper clippings. I've got a lot of that stuff, which is great, but I'd sure like to read the trial transcript. So I get back home to Missouri, and I live in Missouri. And so these trips to Indiana were 7, 8, 9 hour trip. So I get back to Missouri, and I fool around on the internet some more, and I find that I can buy mugshots from the Indiana State Archives. So I've got a mugshot of Alban that I bought, and I've got a mugshot of his brother Gustav. And Gustav wasn't a murderer; he was just a burglar. And there's a chapter on Gustav, and actually in the appendix, and Goshen is involved in that particular chapter. But in my correspondence with this archivist, I say, I'd love to find a transcript of this, and I know that this case was appealed to the Indiana Supreme Court. So maybe it's in the Supreme Court files. Don't make a big deal of this, but if you've got time someday, you're not doing anything, go on and you happen to be in the Supreme Court archives, see if you can find the trial transcript. A week or two later, I heard from the archivist, Michael Vettman, who's become a friend now. Michael calls and says, Mr. Sosniecki, I've got it. And it was just a week or two later, boom, we were on our way to Indianapolis to see the transcript. That's when I knew we had a book.
Very good. Tell us a bit about the writing process.
Well, it was, I would say that it was like writing a newspaper story. I've written newspaper stories. I'm still writing occasional newspaper stories. So, the gathering the information wasn't the hardest part of it. The hardest part of it was assembling it all because there was so much. You're writing a newspaper story, and for the most part, you're getting what happened right then, right now, today. You and I are talking a newspaper story. We write that up, and bingo, you've got a story. Read through it a couple of times, send it to a copy editor like my wife, and bingo, you've got a story. But this was many times, much more than that. So I had all of this material, and I really didn't know what I had, what I still needed. So what I call my first draft, I took all my notes, assembled them all together, and just typed them up in order that I thought they should be. I didn't have chapters yet. I just typed everything up. The newspaper clippings, everything was all typed up. And that got me thinking about what I had and what I didn't have. The second draft, which most people would call their first draft, and I use that term both ways on it, but it was really the second draft. That's where I started assembling it into chapters. And I finished that in, I don't know, March, April, May, sometime in 2018. So, that's 2 years after starting. I finished the first draft. I've got a picture of me that I took of holding the first draft, and I printed every page out, which I always do. And I wish young reporters would print pages out, because you read them and you get a better view of what you've written, where the errors are. Print out, and I've got this picture I took, which of course went on Facebook. First draft is done. And then I sent copies of it to 4 friends. I guess you could call them beta readers. One of them is the director of our library here in Lebanon, Missouri, who I've known for 20 years since my wife and I lived here previously and published the daily newspaper here. I sent a copy to her, and I sent copies to, well, one is an outstanding investigative reporter who I know who's worked in all kinds of media, and then to two other journalist friends who also have authored published books. So the four of them critique the book, critique the manuscript, send them back to me, and most of them, three of the four of them were really excited about, you've got a book here. The fourth one was more critical, but he told me what needed to be done, and I did it. And of course, my wife, I mentioned, is a professional newspaper copy editor, and there turned out to be 12 drafts, and she read every single one of them. And fortunately, then when it went to a real publisher, Kent State University Press, they made very, very few changes. So I was happy with that. So that was my process.
Nice. Was there anything you had to edit out of the book?
Yeah, a funny story. It certainly wasn't funny at the time. When I started looking for publishers, I didn't really mess around with big New York publishers because, you know, I've been around. I know that a first-time author without an agent isn't going to have much luck with a big New York publisher. So I concentrated on smaller publishers who focus on regional history or on true crime. And I had a few rejections, but not a terrible many. And I had one publisher who was very interested, and I really thought I was going to get a contract from them, but the acquisitions editor said, look, we like our history books to be about 60,000 words, and I'd written about 85,000 words. So I painfully sliced 25,000 words out of it. And he said, good. But on the day I expect to get a contract, I got a rejection. So I added 15,000 of those words back in, which means I called 10,000 words. And I'm glad for the experience, because I think those 10,000 words now are edited better. It just reads better. A lot of stuff that didn't need to be in there is not in there now. So I was happy with that. So yeah.
Good. What kind of writing or writing resources or technology did you use while you were writing this book?
Well, I'm very fond now of some of these genealogy websites. The first one I started using was genealogybank.com. And if you do a little reverse working on it, you actually have access to a lot of newspapers. That may be where I found the Elkhart newspapers. And I've used something like 26 different newspapers in this. Then of course, newspapers.com and ancestry.com. Ancestry.com helped me locate relatives who I didn't know existed. You know, Cecilia had multiple, well, she had 4 sisters and a brother. So there were distant cousins who I uncovered. Some of them still live in your area. And they were all helpful with the book. I also discovered some of the Ludwig family relatives who were helpful with the book and are quoted in the book. So those were great resources. And then my main technology right here is this 9-year-old MacBook Pro that I'm afraid is going to crash every day. And it takes 30 minutes every morning to warm it up. I got up this morning at 6 a.m. I was pushed the button to boot it up just to make sure it was going to go. And I don't want to buy a new one until the book project is completely done, because everything with the book is on this hard drive here. And I sure don't want to lose anything in a transition to a new computer.
Yeah, well, we'll hope that it continues to hold out for you.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us a little bit of what led you to start writing?
Personally writing, I wanted to be Clark Kent. I taught myself to read with Superman comic books, and excuse me, I got them all. I got Superman, Superboy, Action Comics, Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen, Justice League. I got them all. I bought Batman for my little brother, but I got Superman because I was fascinated with Clark Kent. Plus the Superman TV show growing up in the 50s, that was on TV. So that's what I wanted to do. And I started my own neighborhood newspaper in second grade, the Bensonville Monthly News. And my dad ran it off on a ditto machine and a mimeograph machine at his work. He probably did it on Saturday mornings when no one could see it, but I did that for 4 years, and so that's how I got started writing.
Nice. Do you have any advice for young writers?
Well, my advice is more aimed at young journalists because that's what my real career is, and I think first, when you're young, you need to read and you need to write. You can't just go to college and get a major in something unrelated to writing and expect that you're going to be able to compete for a job in a market like today. You can't compete for a job if you don't have experience doing this. I remember even 50 years ago when I was in college that the kids like me had an advantage because we had been involved in high school newspapers. And, I worked as a freelancer for 2 newspapers in my community when I was in high school. So, I had a lot more experience going in. So I encourage people to get that experience. I also tell young journalists, don't be ashamed to get a job, an internship or your first job on a small town newspaper, because you are going to learn so much because you're going to have a lot of things you can do. Don't say you want to go to New York Times or the Washington Post, and maybe you'll get that, and you won't do anything except shuffle paper back to reporters. You won't get to write the experiences that you're going to have on a small town paper. My wife and I. On the last weekly newspaper that we owned, we had internships every summer, and they turned out to be really popular because the kids got to do so much writing, and everyone who we had as interns, doing really well now.
What's some of the worst writing or publishing advice that you have received?
Oh, you make that harder now by saying publishing advice. We, in terms of the book, I didn't ask a lot of people about for advice on the book. I accepted it if it was offered. Now, after it was being published, I have asked for a lot of advice on marketing. I've talked to a lot of different authors. One thing that I knew from one of my friends, they used an agent, and they didn't want to run around to the publishers themselves and try to peddle their book. I didn't want to pay an agent, so I didn't use an agent. Publishing advice, I had people who thought I was nuts when my wife and I started buying weekly newspapers. We started our careers on dailies, and they thought we were nuts doing it. But I'll tell you, we're happily retired now. We bought and sold 3 weekly newspapers and at a profit each one of them. So we're happy that we didn't follow the advice to stay with daily newspapers.
Do you have any other projects in the works?
My wife says no. She says the projects will be in the yard and around the house, and traveling. That may be so for at the beginning, at least for next year. I do have a project in the back of my mind. In 1984, I covered a murder of a small town mayor, a small town called Wablo, Missouri. That was 7 miles away from where our weekly newspaper was. Population was about 700 people. And the mayor was 70 years old, and there were 2 other 70-year-old men who initially were charged. I think only one of them went to prison. But the murder was the result at least at the time, that's what was said, was the result of an ordinance over banning hogs in the city limits of Wabla, Missouri. Again, a rural community of 700. But this became a national story. It was the cover story of Parade magazine, the Sunday supplement, back in the day when Parade magazine was a pretty substantial Sunday magazine. And I was hired to write a couple stories for the Dallas Times Herald about the case. So I think if that's something that I wanted to investigate, there might be a book there.
Nice. All right, my final question for you is, what do you hope your readers will take away from this book?
I think it's a lesson in domestic violence. I think it's domestic violence in the extreme. Spousal abuse may have not been as big a deal back then, but Cecilia was not a perfect wife. There are no heroes in this book, but she had no place to turn when she was being abused, if and when she was being abused by Alvin. Today would be different. There are agencies in every community, every sizable community, even in the town of 14,000 where we live now. There's an agency called COPE where women can go if they're having trouble at home of that nature. So that's the lesson. Don't put up with it. Get help.
Well, thank you so much for taking time to tell us about this book and to talk with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kristen.
Yeah.